Fred rides like the wind, the sacred Sanjaivani water clutched tight, his father's last hope. But in the heart of the swamp, he finds Faulk, broken, bleeding, calling for help. Fred chooses. He saves his brother. And in that moment, Faulk's eyes fill not with thanks, but with darkness. As Fred looks away, Faulk's fingers close around the vial. A switch, mud for magic. A brother's hand delivers the final blow. And together they race to the palace, to doom. It all started when the king fell sick. The royal physician informs his two sons that the king's illness is terminal and he only has a few days left. The elder son, Faulk, who is portrayed as arrogant and dishonest, states his readiness to assume the throne. In contrast, the younger son, Fred, who is described as kind-hearted and honest, tells his father he will serve him until his last breath. At this point, Samba, the kingdom's chief hunter, tells the physician there's a way to cure the king. He explains that beyond a mysterious dark forest at their kingdom's border, there lies another kingdom with a pond containing Sanjaivani water. Drinking this water can heal any illness or wound. Fred immediately offers to retrieve the Sanjaivani water for his father. However, Faulk intervenes, stating that the dark forest is treacherous and not easily crossed, and that Fred lacks knowledge of the outside world. Therefore, Faulk declares he will go instead. Faulk obtains his father's permission and departs from the palace. Samba warns Faulk to be cautious in the mysterious forest and to avoid any illusions. Yet the arrogant Faulk dismisses his advice, asserting he doesn't require counsel from servants. He then rides off on his horse, entering the dark forest and marking trees to remember his path. Meanwhile, back at the palace, Fred is attending to his ailing father. In the forest, Faulk loses his way and ends up back at his starting point. He then spots a woman who observes that he seems lost. Faulk asks her for directions to cross the forest to the other kingdom. The woman agrees but requests food and drink as she is hungry. The arrogant Faulk responds that he has no time for beggars like her and that he will find the way himself since he is about to become king. He then rides on. The woman then exhales a mysterious smoke from her nose, which spreads through the forest, obscuring Faulk's vision. He dismounts his horse, but something mysterious occurs, injuring him and rendering him unconscious. The woman then inhales the white smoke back into her nose. However, dark forces within the forest enter unconscious Faulk's mind through his ear. Faulk's horse, meanwhile, returns to the palace alone. Samba informs Fred and the king that Faulk's horse returned without him, indicating something unfortunate has happened to him. Fred declares he will go retrieve the Sanjaivani water and find Faulk himself. His father attempts to dissuade him, not wanting to put Fred in danger as well. However, Fred insists and obtains the king's permission to go. As Fred leaves the palace, Samba again advises him to be careful in the forest and to stay focused on his objective. Fred agrees, then mounts his horse and sets off into the dark forest. After riding for a short while, Fred also encounters the same woman his brother had met. Fred asks her for directions to proceed. The woman asks Fred for something to eat. Fred, being compassionate, gives her the food he had brought for his journey. The woman is delighted and tells him to go straight to cross the forest and reach the kingdom where the Sanjaivani water is located. Fred thanks her. The woman then asks Fred for gold coins, and Fred gives her all the coins from his pouch. Seeing this, the woman tells him that because of his kind and generous nature, she will fully assist him in obtaining the Sanjaivani water. Fred inquires how. The woman explains that to enter the palace in the kingdom he is going to, he will need to put his hand into the mouth of a lion statue outside and press a lever, which will open the palace gate. However, she warns him that the kingdom is under the influence of dark powers, and everyone there has turned to stone. But she tells him he will find one person there who will awaken if he touches their lips. After that, he will have to pass 3 tests. Fred asks who she is and how she knows all this. The woman replies that she is the forest goddess, and her purpose is to promote good and eliminate evil and dark forces. Fred then asks if she knows about his brother. The goddess confirms, stating that Faulk is arrogant and greedy, which is why the dark forces misled him. The goddess then disappears. Fred then asks where he can find his brother. He hears the goddess's voice instructing him to first retrieve the Sanjaivani water, but to beware of dark forces and not to be swayed by them. Fred then follows the goddess's directions and arrives in the other kingdom. Outside the fortress, he sees a closed gate. Fred places his hand into the mouth of the lion statue near the gate and presses the lever, causing the gate to open. He enters through the gate, and the scene inside is astonishing. All the palace inhabitants have been turned into stone statues, frozen exactly as they were. Fred walks through the palace, observing the petrified statues of royal staff, and dark smoke permeates the entire palace. In one room, there is a portrait of Princess Linda on the wall. Fred enters that room. The princess is lying on a bed. She is not stone like the others, but there is no movement in her body. Fred attempts to rouse her, but she appears lifeless. Fred then recalls the goddess's words and kisses the princess on the lips, which breaks her trance. Linda, startled by being kissed by a stranger, demands to know who he is and how he dared to enter her room and kiss her. Fred tells her his name and explains that he came there to retrieve the Sanjaivani water to save his father. Linda says she recalls being in a trance for the past 3 years due to a dark curse. She warns him that obtaining the water he desires will be very difficult. Fred asked why. Linda then begins to lead him to the location of the Sanjaivani water. During their walk, she informs Fred that to acquire it, he will need to pass 3 tests, and 12 bells will ring during each test to indicate the time available. If he fails to complete the test before the 12th bell, he too will turn to stone. Linda explains that the black smoke visible everywhere is the dark curse. Because of this curse, the well's water has dried up and their people have turned to stone. This occurred because the darkness was aware that this water could break the curse, so it caused the well to dry up. If he succeeds in breaking the curse, the Sanjaivani water will return to the dried up well. Fred asks what he must do for this. Linda states that she doesn't know much, but to begin the first test, he needs to place his hand on the mark above the well. Fred does so, and a gate emerges from the ground. Linda urges him to quickly enter the gate, as there isn't much time before the 12 bells ring. They both enter through the gate and arrive in a garden. Climbing a ladder-like structure, they observe a mathematical problem written with wooden sticks on the grass with an incorrect answer. A rule is inscribed on a platform. Change only one stick to correct the entire problem. Fred is confused about which stick to remove. Finally, with Linda's assistance, he removes the plus sign stick and places it on the 3. As soon as the equation is correct, a box opens, revealing a drop of a chemical. Fred picks up the drop. The 12th bell is about to ring, but they both return through the gate just before it. At Linda's suggestion, Fred drops the chemical into the well, breaking a portion of the curse. For the second test, Fred again places his hand on the mark on the well stone, and another gate emerges from the ground. This time, as Fred enters through the gate, the door closes, preventing Linda from joining him. Fred finds himself in a room filled with numerous items. He starts moving everything to locate the second drop of the chemical, but this takes him a considerable amount of time. 8 bells have already rung, and even after overturning everything, he still hasn't found the chemical. During this time, the room's walls also begin to shake. Fred then notices a picture on the wall. By now, 11 bells have rung, and Linda outside is worried about Fred. Inside the room, Fred removes the picture from the wall, but finds nothing behind it, which disheartens him. In a final attempt, he begins to dig into the wall behind the picture. Eventually, he finds the drop of the chemical and exits through the gate. Linda embraces him joyfully. They both then put the second drop of the chemical into the well, breaking the second part of the curse. For the third and final test, Fred again places his hand on the well stone, and a gate emerges from the ground. Linda tells him this is the most challenging test. She warns that the power of darkness will try to mislead him, so he cannot complete the test within 12 bells, and he must not fall into any illusion. Fred then enters through the gate and finds himself in his father's room. His father appears completely recovered. Fred asks how he recovered. The king explains that he recovered on his own, and that Fred no longer needs to fetch the water or take any more tests. Fred is quite surprised by this. 6 bells have already rung, and Linda, outside, attempts to tell Fred that it is all a trap to prevent him from completing the test. But Fred cannot hear her. Fred's brother and father tell him to relax and sleep because he will be made the new king tomorrow. Fred is delighted to hear this. 10 bells have already rung. During this time, Fred recalls the goddesses and Linda's advice not to fall for any illusion. With this thought, he stands up and starts to leave. His father and brother try to forcibly stop him. Fred tells them he knows they are not real, that they are illusions of darkness creating this act to stop him. Eventually, when Fred does not fall for the dark illusion, his fake father and brother vanish, and he finds the last drop of the chemical there. Fred retrieves the chemical and emerges outside. Linda and Fred embrace each other, having fallen in love. Fred then places the last drop into the well, completely removing the curse, and the Sanjaivani water returns. Fred fills his bottle with the water. Linda asks him to stay, but he says he must go and will return for her. Linda says she will wait for him. As Fred leaves with the water, his clothes get caught in the gate and tear. Meanwhile, Linda takes the Sanjaivani water and sprinkles it on all the petrified people in her kingdom, which cures them. She then tells everyone that Prince Fred was responsible for freeing them from the curse. When Linda sees the torn piece of Fred's clothing caught in the gate, she keeps it as a memento. On his way back through the forest with the water, something happens to Fred that he never even dreamt of. While returning to his kingdom, Fred sees his brother lying injured in a swamp. To revive him, Fred gives him a little Sanjaivani water, which cures Faulk, and he regains consciousness. Faulk asks Fred what he is doing there. Fred tells him he brought the Sanjaivani water because Faulk got lost searching for it. Greedy Faulk then considers that if Fred gives this water to their father and he recovers, the king will perceive Fred as more capable than him. The cunning Faulk devises a dangerous plan. When Fred's attention is on his horse, Faulk fills his own bottle with swamp water and gives it to Fred. However, the pure-hearted Fred remains unaware of his brother's trickery. They both then proceed to the royal palace. Fred tells the king he brought the Sanjaivani water for him. He then gives the king the water from his bottle, but the king does not recover. The king tells Fred that drinking it made him feel even worse. Faulk, standing nearby, interjects stating that the water Fred brought isn't the real Sanjaivani water and that he brought the genuine article. He then gives the king the water from Fred's original bottle, and the king recovers. The king expresses his immense satisfaction with Faulk, acknowledging that he risked danger to bring the water and save his life. Fred is astonished and cannot comprehend what is happening. He attempts to tell the king that he brought the real water. However, the king insists that Fred's water would have killed him. Upon leaving the room, Fred asks Faulk how he acquired the Sanjaivani water, since Fred was the one who brought it. Faulk lies, claiming that the water Fred brought was not authentic Sanjaivani water and that he found the real water in the forest. Fred asserts that Faulk is lying because he desires to be king. Faulk denies this. Fred then pours out the muddy water from the bottle, showing it, and states that this muddy water was found where Faulk was lying unconscious, whereas the water Fred brought caused Faulk to regain consciousness. He declares he will now reveal the truth to their father. The cunning Faulk attempts to stop Fred, but Fred proceeds into the king's room. Unfortunately, the king is asleep, so Fred is unable to tell him the truth. The royal physician present advises against waking the king at that moment. Faulk is overjoyed by this, as it presents him with another opportunity to execute a scheme. A short while later, when the king awakens, Faulk is already by his side and incites him against Fred, claiming that Fred wishes to kill him and intentionally gave him the poisonous muddy water. The king expresses disbelief, stating that Fred is his son and would not do such a thing. Faulk then falsely asserts that Fred wants to kill the king to become king himself. When the king remains unconvinced, Faulk shows him a book about poison, again falsely claiming he found it in Fred's room. Through Faulk's words, the dark power enters the king's mind through his ear, bringing the king under the influence of the dark power, just like Faulk. The king then tells Faulk he will banish Fred from the kingdom. However, Faulk argues that if Fred remains alive, he might return and attack again. Therefore, he suggests sending Fred to the forest on the pretext of hunting and having Samba, the hunter, kill him there. The following day, Fred rides out of the palace with Samba. During this time, Faulk watches them through a telescope from the palace window. A short while later, deep in the forest, Fred tells Samba he will not hunt innocent animals. Samba states that he knows Fred is a kind person and reveals the truth. He was sent by the king and Faulk to kill Fred. However, Samba states he cannot do this to a good person like Fred. Therefore, to convince them, he will fire a shot in the forest to make them believe he killed Fred. He warns Fred never to return to the kingdom, as otherwise they would discover the truth and kill both Fred and Samba. Fred agrees. Samba then fires a shot into an empty spot in the forest. Hearing the shot, Faulk at the palace believes Fred is dead and rejoices. He then tells his father the news. As the king hears the distressing news, the dark force exits through his ear, but he does not fully comprehend what he has done. Meanwhile, the goddess encounters Fred, who is wandering in the forest. She tells Fred she knows what his brother has done, that he is a wicked person and has become even more so under the influence of dark forces. She adds that through his brother, the dark force also diminished his father's ability to think and understand. Hearing this, Fred states that he desires neither the kingdom nor to be king, and that he is going to Linda and will remain with her. The goddess warns him that if he does not return, the dark force will spread throughout the kingdom and destroy the people. She advises him to return to the kingdom, assuring him that everything will be all right. Following the goddess's advice, Fred turns back towards the kingdom. Meanwhile, the king, swayed by Faulk, is about to declare him the new king, and preparations for the ceremony are underway in the kingdom. Prince Fred enters his kingdom with his face covered by a cloth and meets his friend who prepares horses. His friend is very happy to see him alive and says he thought Fred was dead. On the other hand, after a considerable amount of time has passed, Princess Linda herself sets out to meet Fred. In the forest, she encounters the goddess who tells her to quickly go to Fred's kingdom or she will not find him. Back in the kingdom, the stage is set, and the king is about to announce Faulk's coronation in the presence of the people. Fred also stands among the crowd, his face covered. Just before the king places the crown on Faulk's head, Linda arrives and tells the king she has come to thank his son, who freed the Sanjaivani water from the curse and cured his illness. The king points to Faulk, saying, "This is my son." However, Linda retorts that Faulk never even went to her kingdom. When Faulk's deception is revealed, he again attempts to mislead the king. But the king states that he had his own son killed because of Faulk's lies and deception. Hearing this, Fred, who was standing there, comes forward and says he is still alive. The king is very happy to see him alive. He then calls him to the stage, declares him the new king, and announces his marriage to Linda. As the new king, Fred pardons his brother, but assigns him the duty of overseeing the stables. He also appoints Samba as his chief advisor. This is how this fantasy movie ends. Give it a like, subscribe to the channel, see you in the next video.